mean, a third of his time has been spent out of the country flying around, accomplishing squat. A lot of talk, no action. And I think for a lot of people, perhaps a disappointment. Maybe they should spend a bit more time looking at who they vote for in the next election rather than just saying, oh, Liberal, I like it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ottawa was a fury of activity today between the budget, the politics, the spin, and everything in between. So we thought it'd be a great idea to get somebody on the show that has lived this in his career. And he's been on the show before. We're grateful to have him back. Former Liberal MP, not under Justin Trudeau, Dan McTeague. Welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Ryan, great to be here. Missed a day since the election and looking forward to another one at some point down the road. It's going to happen.
Indeed. So we want to talk about the budget, but before we get to that, there was a very unexpected, but I think obviously orchestrated development that happened today, which was former Conservative Speaker of the, or Deputy Speaker of the House, Chris D'Entremont, surprised everybody. Well, maybe surprised nobody. I don't know, but he surprised me when he resigned from the Conservative caucus and, according to the Toronto Star, is now crossing the floor to join Mark Carney's Liberal Party. What did you think about that when news broke?
Well, I thought the timing was not unnoticeable. I mean, clearly he's either very worried about an election, which he can or cannot win, but either way, he's not going to win now. Voters have a very long memory, and they don't really, treat floor crossers, turncoats very well. And now Chris D'Entremont has been considered a bit of a Liberal in the past by other accounts. Even members in the Liberal Party have been sort of trying to scout him for years. But I don't know him personally. I just know that I guess he just wanted a more gentle landing and the prospect of maybe surviving a lot longer in an election that allows him maybe to get a lot closer to the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, who, like Doug Ford, played a big role in backing and helping Mark Carney deliver seats in their province. So it's a sad indictment, but it does suggest to me that the public has every reason to be cynical. You vote for one person, 50% plus one, or whoever comes out with the largest number of votes. And because the vote was close, you decide, well, maybe it's my opportunity to switch sides. It only happened 7 months ago. What's changed? And you've been a Conservative member for quite some time. I understand he was a good friend, has supported Aaron O'Toole, and that may have been the reason why. We know that Aaron O'Toole is not as strident a Conservative leader as say, Pierre Poilievre. Certainly willing to put water with his wine with things that annoyed people like me, who are Liberals, true Liberals of many generations, with the idea that, we could lose some votes in Western Canada, provided we try to, as it were, suck up to some constituents on the idea of climate change. That was a dumb idea then. It, of course, certainly has very little in the way of any traction today. But I think what D'Entremont has done, unfortunately, is allied himself with those who whispered, that he was actually always a bit of a closet Liberal, probably liked the idea of being a bit of a person in the middle as his former role as Deputy Speaker. Beyond that, he'll have to explain that to constituents and an entire team that he's basically walked away from and try to embrace his enemy. So I don't know how this works, but someone said we ought to have automatic seat changes in the House of Commons where the person can just hit a button and get switched to the other side. But I'm sure he'll enjoy his anonymity on the backbenches of the Liberal Party.
Well, if you believe the reporting, because an article actually came out in Politico right before the budget was actually dropped, and I think you're right. The timing was not coincidental. But in that article, they specifically mention that there was a quote unquote falling out with Chris D'Entremont and the Conservative Party when they wouldn't back him to run for Speaker of the House, which he wanted to, seek that position. So that actually really bothered me because For many, many years, the understanding has been, you can't trust politicians because they always lie, or they're always self-interested. And if you believe the reporting and if that's accurate, then that's exactly what happened with Chris D'Entremont. Is that he wanted to become Speaker of the House. At the time when he stood up and said that he wasn't going to be running, he did look annoyed. I'll be honest. When we were covering that, at the time we applauded him because this seemed like a very team effort type of move, because the Conservatives needed every vote in the House. So they couldn't afford to actually have a speaker up there. But obviously he put, if this is true, he put personal ambition above the wishes of his constituents and the whole strategy of his party, of which he agreed to run under, not even 7 months prior to now. So it's just very disappointing. But I guess here we are. But what do you think the odds are of a upcoming cabinet shuffle, and could we see Chris D'Entremont in a cabinet position as a reward for him coming over?
Oh, maybe. I mean, the Liberals have to try to win back and get a couple more seats so that they can actually have a functioning majority. But that majority depends on everybody showing up all the time, and it would have also included the prospect of your speaker being from the opposition side, not from the government side. With the current speaker, known for a long time, Francis Scarpelaggio. It means that if there is a vote, he doesn't vote unless there's a tie, and that hasn't happened since 2006 or 2008, when Peter Milliken, who I ran against, by the way, for speaker way back in 2000, sided with the party that he belonged to. Even though it was a minority Conservative government, he still served as speaker well past when the Liberals lost election to Stephen Harper in 2006. One thing's very clear: D'Entremont will never be speaker. He wouldn't have the confidence of the House, so he shot that bullet as well by not having the confidence of Conservatives. And you have to have all people supporting you. It's likely that yes, the party made a decision, but at the time to discourage him from running because they needed every seat. But all this will get rectified probably in a year from now or less, when there is another election. And I'm not usually a betting man, but I know enough about politics. I don't think D'Entremont will probably run, much less be successful in doing so, especially as the tide is going to change. I mean, the Liberals have really put themselves into a corner here, fiscally and strategically, and I don't see how many people are going to, unless they can be bamboozled again and bribed with a lot of money, which we now clearly don't have, given the amount of debt that we have. I don't see Liberals being as enthusiastic, and I don't think the NDP is going to sit on the sidelines. I mean, no doubt after Jagmeet Singh, the party will probably recover, maybe 1 or 2%. That will be very good for the Conservatives. And I think with the Conservatives having lost a number of seats by fractions of votes, it's likely that there will be a new government at some point down the road, and it won't have Mr. D'Entremont as either its speaker or, more importantly, as a potential cabinet minister, which he could have been, given that he's bilingual. I can tell you, it's a rare commodity. I'm fluently bilingual. I mean, I speak French and English, and it was very helpful in my time as a member of Parliament to be able to reach out. But I think he's shown. I think that he has a bit of a temper, and he's obviously not very happy with what's happened, and has decided to take his marbles and go somewhere else. Unfortunately, he'll get the same treatment with the Liberals over time. We'll just forget about him after this day is over.
Now, what does that mean for his Parliament office, his constituency office? Because there's people that have been working for him that were of the understanding that they're working for the Conservative Party, and the constituency office, the EDA. Like, what happens with all of that when someone crosses the floor?
Well, the EDA continues to function, just no longer has an incumbent. It now has to go look for a candidate to nominate for the next election to defeat Mr. D'Entremont. The Liberals will have to accept the association, but I can tell you a lot of Liberal associations are not very strong. So it may not be all that difficult. We saw this before in Nova Scotia. I mean, I was there when Scott Bryson left the Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, to join the Liberals during that period of time. So did Belinda Stronach. I mean, but from Nova Scotia, it's not on. I mean, being a Conservative in some parts of Atlantic Canada is a tough thing to do, and perhaps Chris is still not just upset with not being made Speaker, but given that he's the only Nova Scotia Conservative that was left, that maybe there's the grass is greener on the other side. Whatever he's done to cast his lot, he's going to find the next year the disruption that he's made for others, and a lot of alliances, I think, are probably gone. The association is, or the EDA will have to obviously take into account they no longer have an incumbent. Doesn't change their status. Doesn't change his status on Parliament Hill. He still has an office. It's probably going to be changed to some other location, but that's not likely to be a problem. The staff is usually hired based on their expertise or know-how of parliamentary procedure, the understanding of committee work, research, communications. Usually have two people working with you on Parliament Hill if you're not a minister. So that I don't think there's going to be much of a change. Their budget doesn't change. He's still an elected member, but maybe we have come to the point in time where we have to start to say, well, it's not up to the member of Parliament. No matter what their grievance may be, you have to bring it back to the people. It's their choice, not his.
Yeah, I think if someone doesn't want to remain in the position that they were elected in, I've seen a lot of comments online today. I think, and I agree with this, is if you want to be there, then you must resign, and a by-election is called. Like it is what it is, because you've now taken that out of the people's hands that actually put you there, and that is anti-democratic, and I don't think it's right. But that's a discussion for another day. But unfortunately, this has kind of overshadowed what the main point of today has been. So let's get into that, which is Mr. Carney's ridiculous monster budget of $78.3 billion in deficit spending, $141 additional billion in new spending, and something like $322 billion extra dollars in deficit over the next 5 years, something like that. And now our interest payments are outpacing the actual health transfers. What is your reaction to this budget?
Unbelievable. I mean, surreal. We knew this was going to happen. I'm surprised the number isn't higher, because someone still has to account for the 6 or 7 months of the year that the government should have had a budget, didn't prepare one. But every single analysis has been done of previous budgets going back to 2020. Has a Liberal Party, has a government that has never been able to project accurately where deficits are going, other than the fact that they're rising and debt is rising with it. And of course, all that is fine for some people, Ryan, on the assumption that the economy is growing, but the economy is not. Total cuts maybe represent 2%. Growth in the economy probably going to drop 2 or 3%. So we will continue to see an unreliability of these numbers. It has to be perfect. Yes, a change from Justin Trudeau, who was basically, a drunkard when it came to spending, didn't really care, and budgets balanced themselves. But here we have, more evidence of the fact that the Liberals were in fact on a significant spending spree. And at $78 billion, that by any measure is the largest deficit that we have ever seen. And deficit, I want people to understand, that's over the amount that we are taking in, and that we have to now go borrow in order to meet the obligations. And so 78 billion, 60 billion, 50 billion, those numbers are likely to go up in the next few years unless there's a massive rebound in our economic fortunes. And we've done a lot to ensure that the economy of this country doesn't function. I mean, migration was the big problem, employing and using and overemphasizing net zero nonsense, which is still in the books, emissions caps, which they say might come off if certain conditions are met, which I think are ridiculous. No one is going to invest with those kind of, add-ons and exceptions and buts and if and commas. They're not going to come into Canada and start investing in oil and gas. much less manufacturing. That now, Mark Carney's made it very clear. Yeah, I got rid of the carbon tax, the consumer one, but I'm going to replace it and make the industrial carbon tax the center of my green fantasies and policies that have been destructive to Canada. So for consumers who thought, oh, we're off the hook, you're back on the hook. It's just it's going to be given to business, and whether or not they accept it will be up to whether or not they want to stay in Canada. And some will probably pack up and leave. And I think that with that, consumers are hurt, businesses hurt. I see even greater deficits in the years to come. I think like all previous deficits, the Liberals' projections and budgets for the years ahead, the Liberals have been getting it astonishingly wrong, underestimating the damage of their policies. And I think this will be no different.
Well, and the most insulting thing is, even though that Mark Carney lays out the industrial carbon tax in his budget, like it's there for all to see, his ministers are telling anybody who is actually talking about the industrial carbon tax, they're saying that it's an imaginary tax, and they're trying to gaslight you into thinking that this isn't real, when you can actually see on the government website, it actually says strategy for industrial carbon pricing, aka the carbon tax. Like this is not something that is in dispute, yet the ministers are trying to say that. And as I want to touch on one other point, because in Champagne's speech, he's trying to say that, oh, don't worry, our massive deficits are fine because we're expecting $1 trillion of investment to come into Canada. What do you say to that?
You're expecting people to actually take advantage of the $1 trillion grift. You're not getting anybody coming in with money. They're going to take advantage of the money you have. We saw that with electric vehicles. We've seen this with policies surrounding, green energy. Everything these guys have touched so far has meant only one form of incentive, and that's public borrowed tax dollars being given to grifters to achieve a certain objective, which is pyrrhic at best, unnecessary, plainly. And so for any normal look at this, I mean, one of the things that I think is even more disturbing is the idea that Canada's got the best GDP debt to GDP ratio, despite the fact that it's $1.5 trillion bucks, and that doesn't take into account the sub-sovereign debt. Our sovereign debt in Canada is more than double that, and if you measured it based on the fact that we cannot use the CPP and we cannot use the pension plan to collateralize that debt, as some ridiculous people are willing to do. I call them stupid and ignorant because they are. There's no way you can raid the CPP or QPP and pretend that that's somehow an asset that you can, you can borrow even more money on. Given that that is the reality of the situation, no other G7 nation has sub-sovereign provinces or debt holders that are allowed to go out there. Our number is more like 115, maybe even 120% debt to GDP. Means basically our debt is greater than the worth of our economy. And that should scare everyone. I'm not waiting for the Dan McTeagues of this world to make that kind of conclusion, because that's something that I was trained with when Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien, and finance ministers after Paul Martin had to look at, including Ralph Goodale. This is not going to go over well. And I think debt bond rating agencies are going to definitely have to look at this more clearly, more soberly. And it's a point to them that I would simply make here, and I'm going to express elsewhere. You cannot use, it's not fungible. You can't liquidate the CPP or the QPP, the pension plan, and use that as a means of leveraging the massive debt that you have. And that given that is the case, unless they're extraordinarily ignorant, contrast that with what provincial debt is, which is about the same, and you now have not $1.5 trillion, but actually $3.6 trillion in debt. And now you can imagine what happens. What if interest rates go up this year as a result of bond rating agencies saying, hey, we want more money. If you want $78 billion bucks of money you can't have, and you've been doing this for several years. Last year it was 60, the year before that was 50. We're going to lend you the money, but we're not giving it to you for 3 or 2%. We want 7 or 8%. What happens to your debt and your deficit financing at that point? Suddenly, all of the assumptions are thrown out the window. A budget is really about forecasts, and the assumptions are usually based on present trends continuing. The fact that can't and anything can change very quickly. Forget what Donald Trump does with the tariffs, which are not going very well. anything along the line of suddenly a big increase in our commitments on interest would cause those numbers to go even higher. So you're not paying, $1 billion, $1.2 billion a week now to service the debt. You'd be paying $1.3 billion. And if interest rates go higher, maybe $1.4 billion, $1.5 billion, that then comes from the revenues that you're bringing in. But the revenues, Ryan, we have to understand, as the economy is weakening, revenues are falling. So the debt isn't going to fall with it. The debt is going to go even higher. So the idea that somehow, we can create incentive. I've heard Liberals in every previous budget. The Conservatives had a great ad today. They keep talking investments. They've been talking investments since 2015. They think that debt is an investment. It's not. And so I think unless people want the wool pulled over their eyes, it won't matter what about our elbows up and how trendy and cute we want to be, and say that this is a little bit like trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. I think real financiers are going to get hold of this, that this country is not a safe place to invest, and that its debt situation is worsening literally by the month.
Yeah, and by the year. And it's a really good point that you made, because as Canadians are losing their jobs, then that is lower revenue for the government, because that's less income tax that those Canadians are actually going to be paying to the government. And we're seeing thousands of people losing their jobs across the country as a result of the poor economic climate. Like, if we had a good economy, it wouldn't matter if Trump had these tariffs up, because we would be doing okay. It wouldn't hurt us as much. The problem is we've been put in such a weakened financial position by liberal policies over the last 10 years that this is where we are. And they're sitting here trying to blame Donald Trump, but that's irrelevant, because we have our own house here and they haven't taken care of it. And like these previous liberal budgets, they seem to think that they can spend their way out of debt. And what is the first lesson that anyone is taught in their life about economics? Don't spend money you don't have.
Exactly.
And any money that you are quote unquote investing, it's always a gamble. But never mind investing in the military. No, you're spending money on the military, because the military isn't going to pay that money back. So it's not an investment. So given the fact that they keep using the spin, it's disrespectful to Canadians, because it's not being forthright with how they're spending their money and how they're spending their great grandchildren's money at this point.
Yeah, there is so much to come at this. I mean, we all want the country to do much better, but the sad reality is that we've accepted a government that has ruined the national finances, and we have a leftover government, call it what it is, coming in trying to make something out of what is an absolute abysmal situation. And saying that there are comparisons around the world makes it even more odd, given that our situation should be a lot stronger, given our natural resource sector, given our industrial sectors that we've had in the past, given our human talent, and given the attractiveness that we once had and relative wealth that we once had. But we have frittered that away in favor, and let's be honest about this, net zero, DEI, ESG. In our attempt to be woke, we've basically sold the farm for a handful of beans. And there is no beanstalk at the end of the day that's going to take us to some promised heaven. The reality is that we have painted ourselves into a serious corner, the likes of which trying to suggest that we can get out of it by tiptoeing or maybe things will get a little bit better. They're not. And we know full well, even with or without a deal on tariffs, at the end of the day, as long as Canada maintains supply management only for the dairy farmers or a few others, and as long as we have the financial institutions of this country saying there's no big deal here because they don't want Americans to be allowed access to our market, as long as we don't open our market, we're going to continue to find ourselves whipsawed between two superpowers who at the end of the day think of Canada as a bit of an irritant and a bit of a problem. Now, I'm not just referring to the United States, but also China. And both would love to use us, but both recognize the vulnerability that 10 years of woke voting elbows up, COVID paranoia or fear or hysteria, pushing dope in 2015, or, even climate bedwetting in 2019. We've made some bad choices here, and bad choices have consequences, and they're going to have consequences, sadly, for the people who both misunderstand how bad this government has managed things and for which this current government is not prepared to relinquish. They still want to pretend that what happened over the past 10 years was just an aberration that can change overnight and suddenly become the St. Paul Martin liberals. They're not. And as long as they cling to international narratives like the World Economic Forum's agenda or the United Nations agenda that somehow Canada's responsible for, changing the world temperature because it's emitting inert CO2 at a very low level. As long as we continue believing that, capital is going to flee the country. People are leaving the country. Capital doesn't want to come here. I don't see anyone coming to rescue Canada's economy as long as we hold fast to these ideas that we can spend our way out of a problem. This is not about, telling us what we're going to do. Show us what you're going to do. And at the end of the day, what they're showing us is more of perhaps a lesson, but more of a continue down this very dark path, which I think is going to leave a lot of Canadians with the feeling that this country has certainly lost its way.
So Canadians are looking at this budget. They're concerned. Young people are obviously very nervous. Maybe they're losing a sense of hope as a result of what this budget is going to imply. What do Canadians do? How do Canadians respond to this in order to try to retake control of their own destiny in this country?
Well, I think understand that the government has got to abandon the principles on which it has created the economic chaos in this country and destabilized it. Saying that your migration, you're going to lessen a little bit, I think is too late. And it's there should be zero at this point. When it comes to migration, the country needs to heal. It needs to absorb those that have come in here and let them work for some time. It needs to understand that you can't have paltry spending cuts while engaging in massive extra spending, additional spending, and try to somehow create the impression that some is going for capital and some is going for for operational purposes. And I think that's where we have to end this idea that they can spin this into somehow being something it clearly is not, and that this is a very bad budget. That should have reflected the severity of 10 bad years of government policy, for the likes of which they are not prepared to. They're not prepared to relinquish net zero. I didn't hear that today. What I heard is a government that wants to double down and maybe kick it further down the road, provide us with industrial carbon taxes, probably not get rid of the emissions cap. So they'd like to say they are going to do it, but they also at the same time believe that saying all these things will somehow attract capital back into Canada. And it's not. The capital is gone. We've scared people away. We've told them to get lost. We've told them that you can only come in here unless it's sustainable. Oh, that you have unanimity among Indigenous groups when it comes to the planning of pipelines. There is no unanimity in this country. There might be consensus. There's going to be mostly winners and the odd loser. But if we think we can somehow create an environment where Canada is suddenly supercharged with a budget that is going to spend more money we have to borrow, we are kidding ourselves, and we are very, very dangerously coming to the point where the world is going to eventually realize, Canada, your total net debt, federal, provincial, and without the help of CPP and QPP, which you cannot use, you're in big, big trouble, and you're one of the worst, one of the worst actors of the OECD as it relates to debt. But we won't even go down the issue of GDP, labor market, because we know our productivity is very low. We cannot jumpstart an economy that at this point is 20 fathoms below sea level.
So we talked months ago about Mark Carney, what he might be bringing to Canada, and that interview ended up getting a lot of attention. It's actually resurged in the YouTube algorithm. There's been a lot of people watching it again. Is this the Mark Carney that you predicted?
Yeah, very much so. That's a great man of deception. This is the guy who, even when we had that interview, January, February of last year, I couldn't have predicted that he was going to come out and say, I can do a deal with Trump. How's that working? He's done nothing. The deliverables have been zero. The talk has been substantial. But this man used to take credit for everything that he had nothing to do with. And at the end of all of this, I think he's just sort of poking along, hoping that, that things get better and that he can take credit for something. Even the idea that he could maybe have a trade deal by now with Donald Trump, which might have perhaps enticed him to call an election to say, "Hey, I delivered on the tariff side, so I could handle Orange Man bad," which would fulfill his commitment that he made in the election. So far, hasn't happened. I'm sure he's pretty happy with Doug Ford, his buddy who helped him get elected by switching sides. Sounds like he did a Chris D'Entremont, or Chris D'Entremont did a Doug Ford, maybe even a Tim Houston. But that aside, I think Mark Carney is, a lot of people are basically saying, my kids have lost their jobs. They can't find work. I'm about to renew my mortgage. It's coming up in January and February and March. The value of my savings is gone. I don't probably have a job in a month or two. And I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet. And the food banks aren't delivering, 3 meals a day for me. I think the anxiety that the public is expressing is something I haven't certainly seen in 40 years. Is it deserved? Nobody deserves to go through this, but our careless and wanton desire to be cool and trendy and go with the ESG, DEI, net zero, the latest fads, has got us in one hell of a mess. And we've taken a country that in my time built a very strong fiscal position, and we've cast it to chance. We've thrown it away. We've discarded the idea of fiscal prudence in favor of being cool and being the latest that can virtue signal our dollars that we can spend with abandon in other places around the world. It's like, they like to fly around, and they do fly around. Mark Carney being the best example. I mean, a third of his time has been spent out of the country flying around, accomplishing squat. And so if that's what Mark Carney is all about, maybe it does prove, in fact, what I had said last February. A lot of talk, no action. And I think for a lot of people, perhaps a disappointment. Maybe they should spend a little bit more time looking at who they vote for in the next election rather than just saying, oh, Liberal, I like it, click. Word to the wise, it isn't the same Liberal Party, but its leader is very much like the previous leader. It looks like he's going to spend a lot more than Justin Trudeau did, if that can be believed.